can't do that. Shoot her or something.
Virtuality is one of the new Ascension paths that machine empires will be getting with the new DLC, The Machine Age. I believe this Ascension path is available not just to regular robots, also individualistic machines, and probably if you take the synthetic fertility origin, one of the new origins, you could choose this as your final destination. It gives some crazy bonuses, and the developers have talked about it favoring a tall playstyle. However, I've done a few thought experiments, and I believe it may be a trait that is better for wide empires than tall empires. You might think I am entirely crazy. This trait gives you minus 75% resources from jobs if your empire is too large, if you have too many planets, but through the course of this video essay, or possibly even lecture, we're going to explore some thought experiments and work out whether or not that's true, because I believe this actually might be better for wide. I started off by trying to work out what the optimum number of planets that you would want in a virtual empire would be. And then I started finding some worrying facts. Let's dive in now though and find out what on earth is going on. Let's start by looking at the virtual trait and the virtuality tradition, along with some notes the developers have given us on what is going on with that tradition. And don't forget, this is an Ascension path now. And then we can dive into some of the numbers. So first off, let's look at the virtual trait. This grants minus 90% pop housing, plus 25% minimum species habitability. Don't forget, you are also going to be a robot here. That means you're going to have a 75% minimum species habitability, I believe, on every world, so that's pretty high. You'll get plus 150% resources from jobs. However, that modifier, which is very, very large, is reduced by 25% for every colony you have. Now, I have asked the developers, this does not include your capital, so if you have 2 worlds, your capital and 1 colony, you'll go down to 125% resources from jobs output. This has a minimum value, as we can see in the clustered capacity tradition, of minus 75%. Minus 75% is a massive reduction. That is even lower than the penalty you get from chemical bliss. So this is very, very nasty if we have 10 or more planets. That's where we get to the minimum value. On top of that, we have a pop upkeep per pop of 0.1 energy credits per colony. So with 10 colonies, we're looking at 1 energy credit per pop, which is very doable. With 20, we are looking at 2, with 33, with 44, etc., etc. So having more planets, having more colonies will prohibitively increase our energy upkeep for every pop in the Empire. We will have some maximum value of colonies that we really just cannot afford to go beyond. Do bear that in mind. I suspect that maximum, though, is probably around the 30 or 40 colony mark, 3 or 4 energy credits per pop. With some reductions from ethics and civics, we can probably reduce that by 30 or 40%, but we will have to look at exactly if that is a viable way of increasing our overall number of pops and colonies. Now, I started out this little thought experiment because I was trying to work out what the optimum number of planets and pops we would want to have in our empire as a virtual empire is. Because of course, if you have just a capital, you aren't getting 150% resource output from jobs. If we go up to 2 planets, we get 125% resource output from jobs, but we could be doubling our population. Double the population producing 125% extra resources is of course better than having a single population, halving that population, but increasing output by just a measly 25%. That is the motivation for these numbers. Now, there's something we also need to look at here, and that is the extra text, the extra information on virtual. So whenever we produce a new building or district, we are going to be creating pops out of thin air. From the cloud, your pops are created, and to the cloud, they will return when their job is done. Once you finish this Ascension tradition tree, you will transition from a pop limited playstyle into allegedly a planet limited playstyle, as open jobs will be instantly filled with virtual pops as needed, and unemployed virtual pops will simply be turned off. On top of that, we are going to gain additional districts on all of our planets so we can put more districts on them, and extra jobs from all of our districts. I'm assuming it's going to be just one job. If it's 2 jobs, this is honestly going to be well and truly broken. Alright, that is the background. We know what the virtual trait is. You have heard about the fact that pops will be created out of thin air to fill up jobs. This means that in order to expand our empire, we can colonize a planet, and then we are only limited by our building speed. If we can stack some building speed modifiers from prosperity, from also traits on our leaders, if we get some leaders with the building speed modifier traits, also with traits on our council, we can probably get, 50 to 100% additional building speed. And then we can start outputting a district every 5 or 6 months, possibly even faster, and more building. So we can fill up a planet then in, I'm guessing, 10 to 20 years. And when I say fill, I mean every district and every building slot, thus giving us like 80 to 100 jobs. Meaning, in 10 to 20 years, we can get a new planet with 80 to 100 pops. Wild. So follow me, if you will, on a journey where I simply wanted to work out what the optimum number of planets would be for my virtual pops. Was it 3? Was it 4 planets? Do I want 6 planets? Where is that number? I started off by making a couple of assumptions. I assumed that each planet would have an indeterminate number of pops. That didn't really matter. What did matter would be the economic output of the pops on those planets. For simplicity's sake, I gave each planet an economic output of 100 resource units. Exactly what those resources are, I didn't want to model. This was just a rough modeling system, okay? So every planet will be producing 100 resources base. That will be modified by the virtual trait. Then I simply plotted it. I've standardized the total economic output. This graph, what you are seeing here, the line, or each point on the line shows us the total economic output of the entire empire, right? And I've standardized it to the maximum value we've had here, which I've standardized to 100%. You'll notice that the optimum number is 5 or 6 planets. At 5 or 6 planets, we're producing the most stuff based on this 100 base output, this 100 unit output, additively increased, I should say, by the virtual trait. At 5 or 6 planets, we are looking at a plus 50% and plus 25% output bonus. Of course, the assumptions I'm making with this graph is that each planet is identical to the previous planet. We're going to have some variation based on planet size, for example. A size 12 world and a size 25 world are going to be vastly different in terms of the number of pops and pop jobs we can have. But for simplicity's sake, I've assumed roughly equal. We could do that by saying, well, let's look at the average size of a planet and assume with enough planets we'll end up hitting that average across our empire, something like that. But please bear with me for this thought experiment. If I've lost you so far, if you've got any questions, write them down in the comments below. I will answer them to the best of my ability. You may have noticed, if you're a Reddit user, that I posted this on Reddit a few days ago to see what people's thoughts were. Generally speaking, I had some very robust feedback. I will be addressing that a little bit near the end of the video, but let's go to the next graph along. Because if you'll notice, after 10 planets, we've got a line that just goes up linearly. At around 30 planets or more, that line actually breaks above the maximum output of our 5 or 6 worlds. But having 30 planets, I believe, is kind of unviable to rush out in the first 30 to 50 years of the game. That would be utterly insane. So clearly, 5 or 6 planets is the optimum. But actually, we've done something a lot of physicists, a lot of scientists do. we've neglected our own form of air resistance. We've not taken all of the facts into account. And if you're enjoying this video, please graph that like button. The thing we have failed to take into account, ladies and gentlemen, is that resource output is not only modified by the virtual trait. There are lots and lots of other modifiers we generally end up stacking throughout the game. I am talking about resource increase from stability. We're probably looking at around 20% or so resources from stability by the mid-game, by around year 50, 30 to 50. We're also talking about technologies, basic resources, specialist resources can be buffed by technologies, traditions, civics. There are lots of different bonuses. Also, of course, we've got rulers, leaders on the planets, governors, all of these different things. Now, I've taken a modest, and I really do think this is a modest buff of plus 50%. Of course, it's easier to buff workers. There are more technologies and bonuses for worker resource output than it is specialists. But let's stick with this 50% as a basic kind of number. Of course, I have not split our POPs, our economic output, into specialists and workers. I have tried to just be a bit more general. Now, when we include that plus 50%, it will stack additively with the virtual trait, and you'll notice our graph looks surprisingly different. We are now getting a maximum, a local maxima as well. This is not the long-term maxima, no. A local maxima at 6 to 7 planets. So the higher our stability, the higher our resource output from other modifiers, the greater the number of planets we would want to have to achieve maximum economic output across the Empire when including the virtual trait. Also at 10 planets, we still reach that inflection point. However, instead of needing 30 worlds to get above the local maxima that we used to have at around 5 or 6, it's now 6 or 7. Instead of needing 30 worlds, we only need 15. That's just 5 more. In fact, that's only double the number at the 7 mark. We double the 7 and go up to 14. We get equivalent to 15, and we get even more. Why is this happening though? Well, when we include this basic plus 50%, and let's not forget that can be higher later in the game, when we include this basic plus 50%, that means that our virtual pops go from being worth 1/4 of a regular pop in the blue line here. The blue line is the old values. That's when we're getting minus 75% and no other modifiers. Those pops from 10 planets and beyond are worth 1/4 of a regular pop without this minus 75%. But when we're looking at the red line, we're assuming a base output bonus of 50%. Minus 75% takes us from 150 down to 75, so the red line pops are actually only worth half. When we take normal modifiers into account, the virtual trait, the negatives from it, only reduce our pop efficiency by 50%. Now that is a big hit, but it's a lot better than 75% reduction, a net or overall reduction of just 50%. This means that at 15 planets, yes, we're paying double in pop upkeep, but our economy overall across the Empire is larger than at 6 or 7 planets. Now, we have to take into account a couple of extra things here, and I need to briefly explain why this is actually a good thing. First off, pop efficiency is down, so of course, upkeep from our jobs is going to be less efficient. We are still going to be paying the same number of minerals in upkeep to produce our alloys, the same number of consumer goods in upkeep to produce our research. However, we're getting a net modifier of minus 25% when we take into account this plus 50% from other sources. And the outputs of those basic resources will be lower. We can't forget that basic resources have better technologies and bonuses for increasing their total output, so they're probably going to sit at more like plus 80, 90 or 100% increase. So actually, you're looking at, with that minus 75% included, around plus 25% modifier overall. But they're still not as efficient as a regular pop without, of course, this minus 75. Then we have the fact that all of these districts and buildings will of course have upkeep, and we have not just double the number of pops, but also double the upkeep on those pops. So like naval capacity, we've kind of gone over it by a factor of 2, and therefore we've gone and increased our pop upkeep in total by a factor of 4, even though we've only doubled the number of pops we have on double the number of planets. If that doesn't make sense and I've confused you with anything I've said here, let me know down in the comments. I'll happily try and go through it again. If I still have you and you're understanding what on earth I'm going on about here, we are getting a bit technical and a little bit mathematical. Wait around, because it's going to get even crazier in a moment. Would you like to get your hands on Victoria 3, Humankind Definitive Edition, Terraforming, and many more games for only €9.99 or your regional equivalent? And on top of that, also support this channel. If you'd like to get your hands on those games and more for only, as I said, €9.99 this month in April, you'll want to become a member of Humble Choice. You'll also get discounts on thousands of games on the Humble Bundle store, and 5% of your purchase will go to charity. Not only that, all of the games that you get for free with Humble Choice will be yours to own forever. This is not a subscription service where you will lose access to your games. No. You will get access to those games forever. That link is down in the description. If you follow it, you'll also be supporting the Montu Plays channel. How does this compare to populations, empires without the virtual trait? Now, of course, under our model here, the non-virtual pops will simply have 100 base economic output per planet at plus 50% resources output from jobs, because we're assuming the same basic modifiers. That means that as we increase the number of planets, we get a linear increase in the output of those empires. At 7 planets, the empire without virtual reaches parity with the virtual empire based on economic output for total number of planets. Above that, they simply run away with their resource output. This would make it seem like not being virtual is much better than being virtual. But we've forgotten one important and salient fact, ladies and gentlemen, and that is the fact that we are ignoring pop growth and pop assembly as a virtual empire. I have been led to believe that in order to virtually ascend, we must focus on rushing our unity, that technology may not be as important. Therefore, if we can achieve ascension through virtuality by, let's say, year 30 or so, maybe even as late as year 40 or year 50, we are then in a position where our growth is no longer limited by pop growth or by pop assembly. It is of course now limited by our building speed modifier. And we can, per planet, probably knock out 100 pops in 10 to 20 years per planet. That's a very important and extra fact to add in. So let's say we have 3 or 4 planets by that year 30 or 40 point. Then we go virtual, we fill those planets up to completion, given they're half full of districts and buildings, in about 5 or 6 years. We will then have, let's assume, around 100 pops per planet, so 500 pops in our empire. Other empires with those 5 planets have still had to plod along at regular growth speeds, so they'll have probably somewhere in the region of 150 to 200 pops. From that point, we really start going on the offensive though. We start either building habitats, because we should probably rush for the habitat technology. Maybe we are a void-dwelling species to begin with. That actually may be the best way to do this. Or perhaps we go for conquest, or maybe we're just lucky and there's another 5 or 10 planets lying around. We then start colonizing all of these additional worlds. We colonize probably 1 every 2 years. And we start building buildings on those planets and districts straight away. We're probably going to start with mining and energy districts in order to get lots and lots of minerals to allow us to continue this mad rush. But basically, we are going to aim to get around 15 planets up and running, maybe even 20, by year 60 or 70. That means if we have 15 planets with 100 pops per planet, we're now looking at a population of 1,500 at a very, very early point in the game. a population of 1,500 while other empires have 200 to 300. Yes, your pops may be half as efficient as their pops, which is bad. Don't get me wrong, that is bad, but if you have 5 or 6 times the number of pops as your opponents, even if each of your pops is worth half as many as theirs, quantity is a quality all of its own, ladies and gentlemen. And that means we can have this massive economic juggernaut of an empire with a massive population, basically unlimited pretty much resources, or at least double to triple the resources of our neighbors. And then from there we can go on the aggressive and take lots and lots and lots of vassals. We should also take into account a couple of other things as well. First off, this minus 75% modifier will not affect trade. Yes, you heard me. It won't affect trade. So we've now got a situation where we can probably get plus 25%, maybe even more, trade value, and that's basic trade value before other modifiers from traditions, civics, etc., technology, whatever, leaders. Who cares? We can get a massive amount of trade value. Now, if we manage to get a trade federation up and running, that trade value can then be converted into consumer goods and unity, and there will be no penalties compared to a regular empire. It's so goddamn good. We're going to be getting a massive, phenomenally massive value in trade. That's going to pay our energy upkeep, both for ships and population, along with, if we can't get a trade federation, at least we can pay our consumer goods or unity. We could then look at having regular biological or regular machine pops, bringing some of those into our empire through possibly migration packs or just a bit of conquest to get those pops to be working the research jobs. That's something we almost certainly don't want our virtual pops with minus 75% to be working. We'd much rather have basic normal pops in. That is pretty crazy. So we'll get non-virtual pops working research, hopefully stick some of them onto alloys as well, get our basic resources worked by virtual pops along with trade worked by virtual pops, and you're looking at a crazy strong empire. This graph here that on the screen does not take into account the effect of trade value being untouched by this trait. This means I believe that the virtual trait will be much, much better for regular individualistic empires rather than Gestalt consciousness empires. And again, I want to address, yes, regular pops are going to be better. Regular empires will have a better value per pop. But if you, as I said before, can have 5 or 10 times the number of pops that your opponents have at the same point in the game, you're going to be much more powerful, even if your pops are half as productive per pops. This yellow or orange line, honestly, I can't really tell what color it is better. But we mustn't forget that those pops are massively limited by pop growth and assembly, and you are not. You are clean and virtual and pure, and you can smash everybody. Honestly, I can't see this being stupidly overpowered and broken. A couple of final things to note here before I address the feedback from the Reddit post that I put out. It probably may be better to go for something like 5, 6, or 7 planets along with the sovereign guardianship, or the sovereign civic, the one that gives you the increase to empire size but massively reduces it per pop, because empire size is going to be very crippling for your empire if you've got such a large number of pops so quickly, and they're producing, a lot less in resource output than regular pops are. So empire size is an issue, definitely. It might be that you simply have to stop pushing forwards with traditions and technology once you go for this virtual rush, and instead you focus on resource output for alloys and conquering the rest of the galaxy. Maybe subjects are where you get all of your research from, along with building a little bit in-house, and then you can deal with it that way. I really don't know. This is, of course, all theory crafting. On top of that, we also do need to deal with the very large upkeep from population. If we have 1,500 pops on 10 or 15 worlds, let's say 15, we're looking at, 3,000 energy credits roughly in terms of upkeep on our population. That's almost an entire Dyson sphere. That's a lot of energy, right? We would need great trade. Maybe a megacorp would be best for this then. But then you're going to be dealing with increased empire size effects from number of planets. That's also quite tough. Yeah, there are definitely issues here still to overcome. but I hope this presentation has shown you that it's really not cut and dry whether or not going for 5 or 6 or 7 planets, the tall approach, is better than going for 20 with a virtual empire. As you get later on in the game and you increase the resource output of all your planets, let's say you get to maximum stability and get more bonuses from max level leaders, the number of planets, that inflection point, goes up and up. If you've got a base of plus 75%, that inflection point pretty much goes away altogether. So it could get pretty darn crazy out there. To address some of the Reddit comments now, generally this seems to be basically a clone army on steroids build. Instead of being locked to 3 planets, 3 or 4, locked to 100 pops, we're now locked to quite a few more planets, and we can get an insane number of pops insanely quickly. There is, of course, the issue of upkeep, because we're going to be getting a minus 75% out to basic resource output, minus 75% to everything if we go over that 10 planet limit, and we won't really have much to show for it until we get to 15 and beyond, meaning we're looking at least 1.5 energy credits per pop, if not more. At 1500 or 2000 pops, that, as we mentioned before, is a lot of energy upkeep. Whether or not we can get mega structures, whether or not we can reduce our pop upkeep will be crucial for this build being economically viable. What are your thoughts on the theory crafting we've engaged in here in this video though? Let me know down in the comments below. Do you think that virtual is going to be better for tall or for wide empires? I'll also probably be running a poll, so check that out on the community page where you can leave your vote, and then we can actually see what the community as a whole think about this new trait and this new Ascension path. If you've enjoyed this video on one of the new Ascension paths coming with the Machine Age DLC, but you'd like to find out more about some of the other Ascension paths, I'm looking at you, nanites, and modularity, then click the video on screen now.